The message wasn't even a sentence, just 3 words that told me everything about the man who sent it. Conference room, now. I read it twice before setting my phone down on the shipping scanner. The warehouse hummed around me, forklifts, reversing scanners, beeping voices calling out pick numbers. I'd worked in that rhythm for 20 years, long enough that my body moved automatically even when my mind went cold. Daniel Morgan, 51 years old, senior operations lead for the Boise Distribution Center, or at least I had been up until today. I wiped my palms on the front of my uniform, feeling the ridges of my old company badge tucked in the pocket. The plastic was cracked at the corner. I used to joke it was the only thing here older than me. I looked around once more before shutting down the scanner, logging out like a good employee. Compliance drilled that into us. Always log out when leaving a station. I even wrote that section of the manual myself. Walking to the conference room felt like a funeral procession no one attended. Along the way, a few folks gave me sympathetic nods. Louise at receiving wouldn't meet my eye. Ellie, new in packaging, looked up from her pick sheet with confusion. She hadn't learned yet that messages like conference room now meant something was about to end. I knocked twice out of habit and pushed the door open. Daniel, take a seat. Chad didn't even bother looking at me when he said it. Arms folded, eyes fixed on the parking lot. Next to him sat Carla from HR, her expression blank in that corporate way they trained you for. There was a folder on the table neatly closed, like they were about to discuss a catering invoice instead of my livelihood. I sat down slowly back straight, the way I taught Chad years ago, when he was still green. He cleared his throat like he was about to give a speech at a wedding. After reviewing our operational priorities, we've concluded your role is no longer aligned with the direction we're moving in. Effective immediately, your position is eliminated. My jaw didn't move. I just listened. I think he was disappointed I didn't argue. Carla slid the folder toward me with rehearsed efficiency. Please sign here, Mr. Morgan. Your severance details are in the packet. Your system access has already been disabled. I didn't touch the pen immediately. I looked at Chad instead. Watched his fingers tap out an anxious rhythm on his sleeve. Same nervous tick he had the first time I taught him how to check the pallet cycle count. I could have said a lot. About the years I'd given, about the weekends I'd worked, about the time I trained him after hours so he wouldn't wash out in his first year. But I didn't. Instead, I picked up the pen and signed my name with deliberate slowness. Thank you for the clarity, Chad. That made him flinch, just slightly. Carla looked like she wanted to apologize, but didn't. HR people rarely do. When I stood my badge clipped against my chest one last time, I paused at the door and glanced back at them. Chad had turned to the window again. Carla was busy tucking the signed page into her folder, sealing it away like a secret. See you Monday, I said quietly. That got their attention. Chad spun in his chair. What? You'll understand. Then I walked out. The hallway felt colder than usual, like the vents had turned up to maximum. I could hear the hum of the loading dock fans in the distance. Every sound felt sharper, crueler. As I walked back to my locker, I slipped my badge off and turned it in my fingers. The photo was old. My hair was thicker, darker, my eyes less tired. I ran my thumb over the crack at the corner. I'd worn that badge on the day my wife died. Showed up for work the next morning because I didn't know where else to go. Compliance said attendance was mandatory. Funny thing about policy, it's only as strong as the people enforcing it. I tucked the badge into my pocket instead of throwing it in the collection box. Because I wasn't done with this place, not yet. If you've ever watched someone gut a team for profit, if you've seen a place you built turned into a line item on someone's resume, subscribe, stick around, I'll show you how it really ends. And you'll want to hear what happened when I walked back in through that same door, but with a title that made them all stand up. Walking out of that room didn't feel like freedom. It felt like being exiled from something I'd spent decades trying to build. The hallway was too quiet. Even the sound of the conveyor belt in the distance felt muffled, like the building itself didn't want to watch what had just happened. I didn't head straight to my car. Instead, I walked the floor one last time, slow and deliberate. I nodded at Ellie when she glanced up wide-eyed and uncertain. She didn't know yet what this place could do to you. Luis turned away, pretending to check a packing list. He'd seen this routine before. I paused by the loading dock, the chill from the open door hitting me like a slap. The air smelled like diesel dust and everything familiar. I let it fill my lungs before exhaling slow. It wasn't the work that got me. It was never the work. It was watching the shape of it change in someone else's hands. Chad Monroe wasn't even a bad hire, not at first. I remembered the day he started. He wore an ill-fitting tie and had this stiff posture like someone taught him confidence by giving him a broomstick to swallow. He asked questions, good ones actually. I stayed late to show him how to read throughput by shift intervals, how to catch cycle count errors before they cost us thousands. He listened, he took notes. When the district manager asked who had potential, I didn't even hesitate. Chad, I said. Back then, I thought teaching someone was enough to make them better. But you can't train integrity. By his third year, he was running Tri-Cities. I heard rumors about how he managed there, tight cost controls, staff reductions, complaints brushed aside like crumbs off a table. But he delivered numbers. And in this industry, that's the only language corporate speaks fluently. So, when he came back to Boise to replace the old manager, I welcomed him. I even congratulated him. It felt right, like a closing loop. For a while, he pretended to listen. He'd ask for my input in meetings, nod at my suggestions. But it didn't take long for the words to lose weight. He started saying things like non-scalable personnel and strategic redundancy. What he meant was cutting people. I watched the training program I built get slashed from 6 weeks to 2. Watched new hires fail and quit because no one had time to show them the basics. But I kept doing my job. When Ellie cried in the break room on her third day, I sat with her until she could breathe again. When Luis messed up a shipment to Denver, I stayed late and rerouted the manifest myself. Because the floor didn't care if you were tired. It only cared that you did the work. Chad didn't understand that. He started holding meetings I wasn't invited to, asking HR for department salary breakdowns. Mine was at the top naturally. I remember the day it clicked for me. I was reviewing the cycle count reports and saw discrepancies. Small at first, then consistent. Loss percentages that looked too clean, too precise. I ran backups, compared logs. The system-generated data didn't match the reports Chad sent to corporate. He wasn't just setting me up to fail. He was writing the story of why I needed to go. That was the moment something in me went cold. I'd seen layoffs. I'd helped conduct them. Hell, I'd written part of the severance policy for our region. But this was different. This wasn't cost-cutting. This was erasure. I touched the badge in my pocket again, feeling the crack at the corner. It had seen me through late-night audits, vendor contract negotiations, safety walkthroughs at 2 a.m. It had been pinned to my shirt the day I canceled a regional promotion because Evelyn's cancer spread. I could have taken that job 5 years ago. Regional director, 6 figures, corner office. Instead, I stayed here, so I could take her to chemo 3 times a week, so I could be there to hold her hand when the morphine dulled her voice to a whisper. Chad didn't know any of that, didn't care. To him, I was a cost center, a line item to be optimized. I paused by the old training board, half-erased marker lines, still visible where I once diagrammed the optimal pallet flow to a room full of wide-eyed new hires. That board would probably be wiped clean now. Funny thing about systems, they remember, even if the people running them pretend to forget. I wasn't angry, not exactly, just resolved. They thought today was my last day. But I knew better. Because when you've spent your life building the system, you also know how to dismantle it and how to rebuild it. I took one last look at the floor before turning toward the exit. The lights above buzzed steady and unfeeling. I didn't say goodbye because I wasn't done here yet. If you think this ends with a signature on a severance form, you're not seeing the whole picture. Just wait until you see who was waiting for me outside that door. I didn't go straight home that day. Instead, I drove for hours. No music, just the low drone of the highway under my tires and the badge sitting on the passenger seat, cracked corner, glinting in the late afternoon sun. It was stupid, really, an outdated piece of plastic with my face on it from 10 years ago, but I couldn't throw it away. It was proof I'd been there. When I finally pulled into my driveway, the sun was sinking behind the neighbor's roofline. The house felt too quiet, too big for one man. I left the badge on the kitchen counter and poured myself a coffee I didn't really want. I kept waiting for the anger to hit the kind that would make me pace the floor or punch a wall, but it didn't come, just exhaustion. I stood there staring at the compliance manual I'd brought home years ago to update the onboarding section. Pages were dog-eared, my handwriting in the margins. Policy 4.7 wasn't even my idea. I'd borrowed it from a training I attended in Portland, but I'd made it work here. That was always my thing, make it work here. My daughter Melanie called around 9. She was in her dorm miles away, but close enough that I could hear the concern in her voice even through the static. How was work? I let out a breath that felt like it rattled my ribs. It ended. A silence stretched between us. She knew what that meant. She'd seen me leave before sunrise for years, seen me fall asleep at the table reviewing shift schedules. She knew what that place cost me. Dad, I waited. Did you fight them? That one stung. Because no, I hadn't. I'd sat there and signed my name like a man approving his own erasure. I didn't need to, I finally said. Another pause. Did you at least tell them what you really think? I looked at the badge on the counter. My reflection in the warped plastic looked older than I felt inside. I will. She didn't press. She just said good in that quiet way she had when she was worried about me. We talked about her classes, her roommate, who kept stealing her almond milk, the internship she was applying for. I tried to focus to be present, but my mind kept drifting back to Chad, to the way he wouldn't look at me, to the folder sliding across the table like a coffin lid. After we hung up, I stood there in the kitchen for a long time. That compliance manual stared back at me. I remembered writing my name in the front cover, ownership, responsibility, a promise to the people I trained that this would protect them from the worst surprises. Funny thing about policies, they don't protect you from ambition. I pulled the manual closer and flipped through the pages, looking at the places I'd revised to close loopholes, standardize reporting, make the work safer and easier to audit, the same systems Chad had used to build a case against me. He didn't innovate, he repurposed. I closed it slowly, fingers resting on the cover. My phone buzzed on the counter, a number I didn't recognize. I almost didn't answer. Daniel Morgan. Mr. Morgan, this is David Langston with Corporate HQ. Do you have a moment? That got my attention. I straightened up as though he could see me slouching. Of course, he didn't waste time. We've been reviewing your training materials and operational reports for Boise, your loss prevention strategies, the onboarding modules you designed. We'd like to talk about a potential opportunity. I didn't say anything at first. Opportunity, that word tasted sour. I appreciate the call, I said carefully, but you should know I'm no longer with Boise. That's exactly why I'm calling. I heard him pause shuffle papers. Look, I know what happened today. It shouldn't have, and it won't stand. We're looking for someone to oversee regional operations, someone who actually understands both process and people. I glanced at the badge on the counter. Why me? Because everything that works in Boise carries your name in the audit logs. Chad Monroe's reports don't stand up to scrutiny. Yours do. My mouth was dry. I thought of signing that severance packet this morning. I thought of Chad avoiding my eyes, of Carla sealing the folder like it was evidence. I realized I was holding the manual so tightly my knuckles were white. Send me the details, I heard myself say. Of course, and Daniel. I waited. Sleep on it. I know today wasn't easy, but don't make any decisions tonight. We hung up. I set the phone down and exhaled so hard my shoulders sagged. The house was silent except for the hum of the refrigerator. I looked at the badge, the manual. Tools of a trade I wasn't done with yet. Subscribe and stay with me. This isn't over. I'm only getting started. You'll want to hear how I walked back in through that same door this time, holding the pen that wrote everyone else's fate. I didn't sleep much that night. I sat at the kitchen table, badge in one hand, compliance manual in the other, like they might argue with each other about what I should do next. The badge felt like failure, proof I'd let them cut me loose without a fight. The manual felt like betrayal, not mine, theirs, using the rules I wrote to justify throwing me out. But they were mine too, both of them. I set them down carefully side by side and leaned back in my chair. I thought about Boise, about the day I first walked in, nervous and overqualified, hoping this warehouse might be the kind of place I could make something of. Not just a paycheck, but a system that worked. And I had, for a while. The team used to joke that I was the last one to leave every night because I wanted to say goodnight to the racks. It wasn't that. It was making sure no one left feeling like they were alone. That was the part Chad never understood. He thought leading was about making the numbers line up. I thought it was about making sure the people who hit those numbers knew they mattered. I closed my eyes and let the quiet swallow me. Somewhere upstairs in her old room was a photo of Evelyn smiling in front of the break room door. She used to visit on her way back from treatment, insisted on bringing the crew donuts even when she could barely stand. She said it was because they took care of me when she couldn't. My chest felt tight. Melanie texted just after midnight. Don't let them erase you. 3 words on a screen that made my eyes sting. I turned the badge over in my palm. Erase me. That's what Chad tried to do. Not fire me. Delete me. Make it look like I never mattered. I picked up the manual again and flipped to the policy revisions with my initials in the margin. Every fix for every broken promise management tried to sell us. It was mine, and it still worked. By 2 a.m., I'd decided. I wasn't leaving Boise behind. I was going to make sure it never forgot what it was supposed to be. When dawn broke, I called David Langston back. He answered on the second ring like he'd been expecting it. "Daniel, you still need someone who knows this place. That's the idea?" I could hear him smile. "Tell me what you're offering." He didn't flinch. He laid it out clean: regional director, full oversight of 15 centers, authority to redesign onboarding frameworks, control over audit structures, budget approvals, and a mandate. Not to cut, to rebuild. When he finished, I let the silence hang for a beat. "I don't want to be anyone's puppet," I said flatly. "You won't be," he replied. "We need you because you know how to make this work, not because we want to tell you how to do it." Another beat. "And Chad. Chad's already sent in next quarter's forecast. We'll be reviewing his numbers carefully." My mouth tightened. Good. I didn't need revenge. I needed the truth to come out. I took a slow breath, let it out. "I'll take it, but I'm not signing anything until I see the contract in writing." "Fair enough," David said. "You'll have it by noon." We hung up. I sat there in the growing light of morning, staring at my badge and the manual. They weren't trophies. They were reminders of the work that still needed doing, of the people who hadn't left yet, of the people who had: Ellie, Luis, even Chad. No one comes into a place like Boise wanting to be the villain. They just forget what the work is really for. That was what I planned to fix. Because I hadn't spent 20 years showing people how to do this just to watch someone burn it down for a line on their resume. I slipped the badge back into my pocket. I tucked the manual under my arm. And I stood up. This was going to be the last time I let someone else decide what my work meant. Next came the part no one expected. I walked back in through their front door. I didn't walk in through the employee entrance this time. I parked in the visitor space, the one closest to the glass double doors, and shut off the engine without moving. For a moment, I just sat there, badge and my pocket compliance manual on the passenger seat. I watched the warehouse wake up. Forklifts buzzing, drivers checking manifests, that low murmur of people who had learned to keep their heads down. No one saw me yet. Good. I needed a second. I ran my thumb over the crack in the badge, remembering the last time I wore it. HR conference room, severance packet, Chad's fake measured tone like he was reciting lines in a play he didn't even believe in. I let that memory burn for a moment before I opened the door and stepped out. The early sun glared off the warehouse siding. This was mine now. Inside the shift lead, Ellie did a double take when she saw me. "Mr. Morgan." I nodded, calm, controlled. "Morning, Ellie." She didn't know whether to smile or run. I kept walking. The break room was quiet, too early for real chatter. Luis looked up from his coffee and went pale. They'd all seen the memo by now. Corporate announcement. Daniel Morgan, regional director. I could feel the weight of their stares on my back as I headed for the conference room. Chad was already there. I paused outside the frosted glass, watching his silhouette pace. He was clutching a stack of binders phone to his ear. From here, I could see the twitch in his shoulder he always got when he lied. I waited until he ended the call. Then I opened the door. He jumped. Mr. Morgan." He forced a smile that looked more like a grimace. "Didn't expect you this early." I let the silence stretch until it became uncomfortable. Then I stepped forward and set the manual on the table. He glanced at it like it might bite him. "You remember this?" I asked, voice even. He cleared his throat. "Your old training manual. Not old, current, still policy." He tried for a casual shrug. "Yeah, sure, but you know how things change." I opened it slowly to the page with my handwriting, like how the audit trail system I built works. He went silent. I kept my tone steady. "You use this to justify terminating me. Cited loss, prevention failures, operational inefficiencies." He looked away. "I have the system logs, Chad. Your edits, your login credentials." He swallowed hard. "Daniel." I held up a hand. "Save it." For a second, I just looked at him. I remembered the kid who stayed late to ask questions, the one I vouched for, the one I taught to read throughput in 15-minute intervals because he wanted to understand. I remembered believing in him. That was the part that really hurt. He opened his mouth again. I didn't give him the chance. "You cooked the books to make me look expendable. You lied to HR. You buried the truth because you thought you could get away with it." He sagged slightly, shoulders dropping. "Look, I had pressure. Corporate was breathing down my neck about cost centers, about margins. I didn't know what else to do." I leaned in just enough to make him flinch. "That's the difference between us. I'd rather tell the truth and get fired than lie and get promoted." He didn't respond. I let the silence stretch until it scraped raw. Then I sat down slowly, the badge resting on the table between us. You have two options, Chad. He blinked. 1. You resign today. Full severance, clean file. You walk out on your own 2 feet. He licked his lips. 2. You stay. Under a 90-day performance improvement plan. Weekly audits, team feedback evaluations. Any failure to meet benchmark means termination with cause. He didn't say anything. I waited. He looked at the badge, at the manual, at me. And for the first time since I'd walked in, he didn't look like the boss. He looked like the kid who used to ask me questions. Daniel, please. No. I stood picking up the manual. This isn't personal, it's policy. He flinched at that. Good, because it was true. I tucked the badge back in my pocket. He didn't stop me as I walked out. Outside, the floor was waking up for real now. Voices, machines, life. I paused by the door and turned back once. He was still there, staring at the empty seat I'd left behind. Next, I offered Chad a choice that would end his career either way. I didn't go back to my car right away. I walked the floor, not as an inspector, not as a boss, as someone who'd bled in these aisles. Ellie was running inventory checks by the inbound dock. She spotted me and stiffened like she expected to get scolded. Morning, I said quietly. She cleared her throat. Morning, Mr. Morgan. I shook my head. Daniel's fine. She blinked at that. Then she asked the question everyone was too polite to voice. Is it true about Chad? I didn't smile, didn't gloat. He's considering his options. She let out a breath that sounded like relief and fear tangled together. I left her to her work. Further down, Louis was taping boxes. He didn't look up at first. He knew I was there, though. I stopped, waited. He finally met my eyes. Didn't think you'd come back. I glanced at the tape gun in his hand, the same one he'd used for years. The handle wrapped in electrical tape to hide the crack he'd never bothered to report. I didn't think they'd want me back, I said, honestly. He swallowed. But you're here. I nodded. Yeah, I'm here. I kept moving. It wasn't a victory lap. It was a reckoning. When I got to my old office now, technically the regional director's local seat, I found the door ajar. Inside, Janelle from HR was waiting. She stood when I entered the folder in her hands. Daniel. I shut the door behind me. Janelle. She set the folder on the desk between us. Chad's resignation. He emailed it in, effective immediately. I didn't touch it right away. I just looked at her. Was it clean? Her mouth twitched. No blow-up, no threats. Just one line. I resign effective immediately. I let out a slow breath. Good. She hesitated. Did you threaten him? That made me pause. I picked up the badge from my pocket and turned it over in my fingers. I gave him the same choice anyone else would get under policy. She watched me carefully. And which policy was that? I dropped the badge on the desk with a soft clack. Performance improvement plan, weekly audits, team feedback, termination with cause if benchmarks aren't met. She nodded slowly. That would have destroyed his career. I met her eyes evenly. So would lying to cover up his own failures. I just offered him honesty. For the first time in years. She didn't argue. Instead, she opened the folder and slid a paper across. Sign here to accept the resignation formally. I'll process the transition protocol. I picked up the pen, hesitated, then signed. My name on the paper felt like an exorcism. When I handed it back, Janelle's expression softened just a fraction. I know you don't want this to be personal. It's not, I said quietly. But it was, and we both knew it. She left without another word. I sat there for a minute, badge beside the manual. I opened the manual, my handwriting everywhere, margins full of notes from late nights in my kitchen, refining onboarding steps, clarifying policy language, closing loopholes. It had been a lifeline for the team, and a weapon for Chad, same tool. Different intent. That was the problem, wasn't it? Tools don't decide how they're used. People do. I closed it and rested my hand on the cover. There would be audits now, not punitive, real ones. I'd review every resignation from the last year. Look for the ones forced out for being too expensive, too principled, too much trouble for someone in a cheap suit to manage. I'd find the good ones. Bring them home. Ellie, Luis, they weren't just numbers. They were the reason the place ran at all. I stood and pocketed the badge one last time for the day. This wasn't going to be easy, but it was going to be honest. I wasn't there to gloat. I was there to start fixing what he'd broken. I didn't stay in that office long. I grabbed the manual, the badge, and walked back onto the floor. Not to check productivity, not to remind them I was in charge. To see, really see. Ellie was coaching a new hire through scan procedures, her voice tight with practice patience. Luis was loading pallets, checking each label twice. The place ran on routines I'd helped build years ago, routines they'd kept alive even when leadership tried to kill them. That stung more than I expected. I paused near the inbound dock and let the noise wash over me. For the first time, I didn't hear chaos. I heard resilience. They hadn't given up. They'd just stopped expecting anyone to care. That was going to change. I turned back toward HR. Janelle was at her desk reviewing Chad's resignation processing. She glanced up wary. Need something? I held up the manual. Time to make a list. She set her pen down slowly. EA list. Everyone forced out in the last 18 months under redundancy or performance realignment. I want files pulled, resignation letters, exit interviews, severance agreements. She frowned. That's a lot. Good. She studied me. You're planning recalls. I didn't blink. They didn't fail this place. Leadership did. She opened her mouth to argue, thought better of it, and just nodded. I'll start pulling files. I set the badge on her desk. Cross-reference with this. Anyone who had their badge deactivated without a formal performance plan or documented violation. Her eyes widened just a little. You're going to reopen cases. Not cases. I kept my voice level. Careers. She looked at me differently after that. Not friendly. Respectful. It would do. I left her to her work and walked back to the conference room. Inside, I dropped into a chair, the manual spread open on the table. My notes filled the margins. Revision 3.2, New Hire Buddy Program. Revision 5.1, Performance Review, Transparency. Revision. 7.4, Voluntary Exit Interview Requirements. I ran my fingers over the ink like it was braille for the blind leadership that had ignored it. Those notes weren't policy. They were promises. And I'd let them be broken. That truth cut deep. I turned to a blank page and started writing. Emergency Rehire Protocol. HR to review all forced terminations for 24 months. Identify key personnel for reinstatement offers with prior seniority honored. Build mentorship framework for reintegration. Audit to validate fairness in review. The pen scratched across the paper, steady and slow. Deliberate. No more loopholes. No more easy exits for bad managers. I stopped and exhaled. Remembered Calvin. 22 years in. Let go because he wouldn't sign off on dangerous load balancing quotas. Joanne. Training lead. Forced out for refusing to cut onboarding from 6 weeks to 2. They weren't mistakes. They were casualties of convenience. Not on my watch. My phone buzzed. Ellie. She didn't say much. Just, is it true about bringing people back? I paused. Yeah. Silence. Then a breath I could almost hear shudder. Good. She hung up without waiting for more. I set the phone down gently. It wasn't approval. It was relief. They'd held on longer than they should have. And they deserved someone who'd do the same for them. My gaze drifted back to the badge on Janelle's desk. It was just plastic, but it meant belonging. Or exile. The manual beside me wasn't just procedure. It was the map back home. I closed it slowly. This place didn't need a savior. It needed a leader who remembered why he ever wanted the job. Tomorrow, I'd start making the calls that would decide whether this place could heal. I got in early the next morning. No ceremony, no team huddle. Just me, a quiet office, and a list. Janelle had left it on my desk overnight. Names, positions, termination dates, exit codes. Redundant. Performance realignment, non-scalable role. Polite corporate terms for throwing people out. I ran my finger down the list slowly. Calvin Hayes, 22 years, terminated 6 months ago for resistance to strategic change. Translation: he refused to endanger his crew with Chad's half-baked throughput targets. I picked up the phone. It took 3 rings before he answered. Hello? Calvin, it's Daniel Morgan. Silence. Then a slow exhale. Didn't think I'd hear your voice again. I didn't bother with small talk. I'm asking you to come back. He didn't answer right away. Same position he asked eventually. Same seniority. Same pay scale. Back pay for the week we stiffed you on severance. And this time, you get input on the load balancing policy. Another long pause. Under you, under me, but with your voice in every meeting. He let out a dry, bitter laugh. I thought you were gone for good. Me too. Silence again. I'm in, he said finally. Don't screw this up. I swallowed. Thanks, Calvin. He hung up without saying goodbye. I set the phone down carefully. Cut-through line, but true respect doesn't come with the title. You earn it in the spaces where it would be easier not to listen. Next name, Joanne Miller. 5 years building our training curriculum from scratch. Forced out after refusing to slash onboarding to 2 weeks. I called. She picked up immediately. Daniel, I didn't ease into it. I need you back. Silence. Same role. Better. You'll lead the division's onboarding overhaul. I want the new policy to have your name on it. Policy says 2 weeks, she said flatly. I flipped open the manual in front of me, the page with my notes. Policy's changing. She didn't laugh. She didn't cry. She just said, okay, 2 calls. 2 old wounds reopened, but better than letting them fester. By mid-morning, Janelle had started prepping rehire documentation, offer letters with reinstated seniority, updated salary bands, a new clause I insisted on adding, restoration of prior benefits and recognition of continuous service for tenure calculations. She raised an eyebrow. Corporate won't like it. They fired people for saving them money. They can spend a little to make it right. She didn't argue, just kept typing. By noon, I'd called 4 more. 3 said yes. 1 told me to go to hell. I deserved that. I didn't flinch. Doors always open, I told him before he hung up. Because leadership isn't about getting everyone to like you. It's about making sure they know they can trust you, even when they don't want to. Ellie caught me outside HR before lunch. Is it true Calvin's coming back? I nodded. And Joanne. Her eyes went wide. Holy shit. She glanced around like she shouldn't have said it. I didn't correct her. Instead, I asked, ready to help train the new hires with her. She blinked. Me? You know this place better than half the supervisors. I want you in those sessions. She looked like she might cry, but she didn't. She just nodded. I'll be there. I walked the floor once more before leaving for the day. Same machines, same aisles. But the air felt different. Not fixed, but possible. I paused by the inbound dock and watched Luis double-check a shipment. He looked up. Boss? I nodded. Luis, you're really bringing people back. Trying. He wiped sweat off his forehead with the back of his glove. Good. Was getting tired of pretending they didn't matter. I didn't have an answer for that. Because neither did I. I just kept walking. By the end of the day, I knew who was coming back and who would make me fight for their trust. They showed up before dawn. Calvin was the first one through the side door. He didn't wait for HR. He didn't want a tour. He didn't even glance at the welcome back packet Janelle tried to hand him. He went straight to the loading schedule board and pulled out a Sharpie. His handwriting was still sharp and blocky. He erased half the overnight shift's assignments, rewrote them in seconds, then turned to the new shift lead Trey and said, "You got questions, ask now. Don't pretend later." Trey swallowed. But he asked. I watched from the hallway. Didn't intervene. Didn't need to. Because the truth was, for all my authority, I wasn't the one who'd fix the floor. They were. Joanne came in an hour later. She actually stopped at HR, signed her rehire papers, waited patiently as they reactivated her system login. Badge printer jammed twice before it spit out a new one with her name. She clipped it on without ceremony. Then she walked directly to the training room. Ellie was already there, nervously straightening chairs. Their eyes met. Or I waited for the blow-up. But Joanne just held out her hand. Ellie took it slow and cautious. They didn't hug. They didn't say much at all. Just gotta work. I let out a breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding. HR finished Calvin's paperwork late. They tried to get him to sign it in the break room. He refused. Not doing it here, he said. Janelle looked at me exasperated. I didn't blink. Conference room, I said. He went without a word. I trailed behind, watching him hold that battered old badge. He turned it over in his fingers. Didn't look at me. Same number, he asked finally. I nodded. Same number, same seniority. It's like you never left. He let out a humorless chuckle. Except I did. I didn't argue. Didn't apologize again. He signed and dropped the pen hard enough to crack the barrel. I didn't flinch. Anything else, he growled. I met his eyes. Yeah, I need you to train Trey. He barked a short laugh. Kid's too green. That's the point. Calvin's mouth twitched. Not a smile. Something like it. Fine. I held out my hand. He looked at it, then shook it once firm. Don't make me regret this, he said. Same to you. After he left, I sat alone in that conference room for a while. Badge in my palm. Manual open on the table. My notes from years ago staring back at me. Employee mentorship required for all senior staff. It hadn't been policy for 2 years. I underlined it again in pen. It was policy now. Later, I walked the floor. Forklifts hummed. Conveyor belts rattled. People kept glancing my way, quick and nervous. I stopped at receiving. Luis avoided eye contact, so I waited. Finally, he looked up. "Boss," I nodded. "How's Calvin?" He grimaced. Pissed, but moving things faster already. I didn't smile. That's why he's here. Luis studied me. Gonna be weird. I shrugged. Better weird than broken. He cracked a grin. First one I'd seen in months. "Yeah, I'll take that." I moved on, stopped outside the training room. Joanne was at the whiteboard rewriting the entire onboarding curriculum from memory. Ellie sat at the table typing every word. They didn't see me. Didn't need to. This wasn't about my approval. It was about them finally having permission to do the job right. I closed the door quietly. Back in my office, I sat with the badge in my hand. Turned it over. It wasn't just plastic. It was trust. Or it was nothing. And today, at least, it felt like it was something again. Tomorrow wouldn't be easier, but it would be more honest. It didn't take long for the grumbling to start. By midweek, supervisors were whispering in corners, their eyes darting to Calvin and Joanne like they were contaminants. I heard one of them outside receiving. "This isn't what I signed up for," he muttered. Luis didn't bother lowering his voice. "Yeah, maybe you should have read the job description. Says lead on it." The supervisor stormed off. I didn't intervene. I wasn't here to coddle fragile authority. But I was smart enough to know resentment festers if you let it. So I called the first leadership huddle. 6 supervisors. Calvin, Joanne, me. Conference room felt too small for that much history. I didn't sit at the head of the table. I didn't want to look like Chad. I leaned against the wall instead. First thing I did was drop the manual onto the table with a loud enough thud to make them all flinch. "I wrote this," I said. They stared at me. Every policy, every process, every accountability measure, and for 2 years we treated it like decoration. Joanne folded her arms. Calvin just watched. I picked it back up and flipped to a page marked in red. Employee Feedback Protocol. Read it aloud. Supervisors must document and address all escalation within 48 hours. I let it hang. Know how many escalations HR has logged in the last year. Silence. I tapped the manual. 0. I watched them shift uncomfortably. That's not because there were no problems. It's because we trained people not to bother. No one met my eyes. Except Calvin. He nodded once. Joanne cleared her throat. "So, what's the plan?" I held up the badge I'd carried all week. Turned it slowly. "This isn't authority. It's responsibility. You wear this, you answer for people you don't always like. You fight for people who make your job harder. You lead so they don't have to fight alone. Cut through lines, simple and true." I set the badge down. New rule. Any escalation lands on my desk within 48 hours. You can handle it yourselves, or you can get my help, but no more ignoring. One of the younger supervisors, Kyle, bristled. "So, we're just supposed to roll over for the old crew you brought back." I didn't move. "Did I say that?" He flushed. "I'm saying you're coddling them." "No," I said quietly. "I'm holding them accountable, same as you. But the difference is, they're not afraid to be held accountable. They just want it to be fair." Joanne didn't smile, but her shoulders relaxed. Calvin snorted. "Fair's a big ask," he said. "Yeah," I admitted, "it is." Silence again. I let it stretch. Then I pushed off the wall and picked up the manual. "I'm rewriting this, starting today, with all of you. Every process, every loophole Chad used to get rid of people who pushed back, gone." Kyle wouldn't meet my gaze. "I don't know if that's going to work," he mumbled. I didn't soften. "Then don't stay." The room froze, because that was the line in the sand. This wasn't about being popular. It was about making the warehouse somewhere worth working in again. Luis leaned forward slowly. "I'll help." Joanne nodded. Calvin just grunted. "Fine, but don't expect me to hold hands." I shrugged. "Just hold the line." He smirked. "That I can do." I let them leave one by one, some faster than others. Kyle lingered, didn't apologize, didn't agree, just said, "I'll think about it." I nodded. "That's all I'm asking." He left without looking back. When the room was empty, I sat down hard in one of the chairs, picked up the badge, ran my thumb over my name. This job wasn't about building an empire. It was about making sure no one had to be afraid to come to work, even the ones who didn't like me. I closed the manual slowly. Tomorrow, they'd have to choose which side of the line they stood on. The next morning, I got in early enough to see the loading dock lights flicker on. Calvin was already there, clipboard in hand, barking adjustments at Luis and two temps who looked ready to bolt. But they didn't. Because for all his rough edges, Calvin didn't lie. "You mess this up, own it. You do it right. I'll back you even when you're wrong." That was the promise he had always kept. I moved past receiving to packaging. Joanne had Ellie and a couple of newer hires gathered around the training station. She was rewriting the onboarding doc line by line on the dry erase board. Ellie raised her hand. "That part about shift rotation. Can we note which positions cross-train?" Joanne paused, then handed her the marker. "Write it." Ellie blinked, then did. That was new. Not just compliance, ownership. I walked to the conference room badge clipped to my belt, but not flashing it around. Kyle was waiting. He didn't sit, didn't look angry, just tired. "You meant it yesterday," he said flatly. "I didn't play dumb." "Yeah, that I could leave." I nodded. "I don't want you to," I added, "but I won't force you to stay." He let out a sharp breath. "Look, I came here because I wanted a stable job, not because I wanted to be the hero. Half the time I don't even know what my guys want." I gestured to the manual on the table between us. "Read this." He snorted. "Once, years ago." I flipped it open. Page after page of my notes. Most of this is mine, but that doesn't make it gospel. It's just what I thought would work at the time. "You want to stay. Help me rewrite it. Make it something you can stand behind." He stared at me. "Or what?" I shrugged. "Or don't, and be another guy who clocks in, clocks out, and complains to his wife that his boss is an asshole." He winced. Cut through line, no apology. He picked up the manual, flipped a couple pages, then dropped into a chair. "Fine," he muttered. "I'm not asking for fine," I said quietly. "I'm asking for honest." He glared at me. "Honestly, I think you're overestimating how much people care about this place." I didn't blink. "That's fair, so let's give them a reason to." Silence. Then he opened the manual again. I let him read. Later that morning, HR sent me a ping on the old internal messaging system. "We need to discuss reinstatement audit plan." I walked down there. Janelle was pinning new policies to the corkboard behind her desk. Rehire criteria, seniority restoration, conflict escalation procedure. She turned when she saw me. "Thought you'd want final sign-off." I read them carefully. Caught a line that made my chest tighten. "Supervisors must acknowledge documented dissent as part of review process." I raised an eyebrow. She didn't flinch. "You said no more silence." I nodded slowly. "Good." Signed at the bottom. Walked back to the floor. Trey was showing Calvin the new digital manifest system. Calvin grumbled about tech that breaks more than it helps, but he listened. Ellie was in the break room with Joanne going over cross-training schedules. I paused at the door. They noticed me. Ellie lifted a tentative hand in greeting. I gave a small nod back. Didn't go in. Didn't interrupt. Because this wasn't mine to fix anymore. It was theirs to own. That was the hardest part to admit, but the most necessary. I headed back to my office, sat behind the old dented desk, pulled the badge off my belt, turned it over in my palm. It was heavier than it used to feel. Not because the plastic changed, but because of what it meant now. Responsibility. Cost. Promise. I set it down next to the manual, ran my fingers over the notes I'd written years ago in the margins. They felt childish now. Naive, but not wrong. Just unfinished, and for the first time in too long, I felt like I had help. Tomorrow I'd find out who was ready to rebuild with me. The last week felt different, not because the work was easier, because it was finally honest. Calvin stayed late every night, building a new load-balancing framework with Trey. Joanne's onboarding manual grew from a few pages to a full binder, annotated in 3 colors. Luis started showing up 10 minutes early just to check the inbound manifests before anyone asked. Ellie left a sticky note on my door one morning. It said simply, "Thank you for making this a place worth staying." I left it there. Didn't need to reply. Because this wasn't about me anymore. HR called on Wednesday to confirm Chad's final paperwork had been processed. Termination audit signed and sealed. I didn't feel triumph, just a hollow kind of relief. A clean ledger doesn't erase what it took to balance it. Later that afternoon, I sat in the same conference room where he'd ended my job. The table still had the scratch where he'd slid the termination folder across. This time, I set down a different folder. New policies. Conflict escalation timelines. A formal commitment to mentorship and transparent performance metrics. I signed the last page in blue ink. Watched my hand tremble a little. Not from doubt, from the weight of it all finally landing. Joanne came in quietly holding her own stack of papers. "These are the final onboarding revisions," she said. I nodded. "Put your name on the cover." She hesitated. "I didn't write all of it. You finished it." Her eyes glistened, but she didn't argue. When she left, I picked up the badge I'd carried for years, ran my thumb over the faded print. This was the last day I'd wear it. Trey knocked once, then stepped in. "You ready?" he asked. I studied him. He looked older than when I'd first met him. Not tired, just seasoned. That mattered more. I stood slowly. "This is yours now," I said, holding out the badge. He looked at it like it might burn him. "You sure?" "Positive." His hand closed over mine. A quiet, steady grip. That was the only ceremony I needed. I spent the afternoon walking the floor one last time. No clipboard, no entourage, just me and the place I'd spent too many years trying to hold together with sheer will. Calvin was coaching a new hire through the manifest system. Luis was teaching someone how to clear an inbound jam without triggering a shutdown. Joanne was in the break room outlining the first training schedule under the new policy. None of them looked up when I passed. They didn't need to. They were doing exactly what we'd built this for. In my office, I pulled the old manual from the shelf, set it next to the letter Evelyn had written. Her handwriting still felt like a map back to myself. You don't have to carry it forever. You just have to carry it long enough to pass it forward. I traced that line with my fingertip. That was the truest thing she ever said. I pulled out a fresh sheet of paper and started writing. Not a resignation, not a farewell, just a note. For the next person who would sit at this desk. It said, "Don't mistake authority for purpose. The badge is just plastic. What you build with it is the legacy." I folded it, tucked it inside the manual, and left them both in the top drawer. Trey would find them when he was ready. I picked up the envelope with my final paperwork and walked out without looking back. Outside, the sun was sliding low over the loading docks. I paused by the entrance. Calvin caught my eye through the glass. He didn't wave, didn't nod, just raised one hand palm open. That was enough. I drove home, with the windows down, the air cold against my face. Not to erase what had happened, to remind myself that it was over, and something better was taking its place. When I got home, I poured a cup of coffee and sat by the window, the same spot where Evelyn used to read in the afternoons. I opened her letter again one last time. Read it slowly, let it land, then folded it and set it aside. This story wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about repair. About giving people the space to do what I'd nearly forgotten was possible, believe in themselves. And maybe if you've stayed this long, you know that feeling too well. You're welcome to join me again. There's always another story waiting to be told, because in the end, legacy isn't what you keep. It's what you leave behind.